The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Sarah Martinez walked quietly through the corridors of the medical facility. Her soft footsteps barely made a sound on the polished floors. She wore simple scrubs and carried a medical bag that had seen better days. To anyone watching, she looked like just another medic reporting for duty. Nobody would guess that behind her calm exterior lay secrets that could silence even the toughest Navy SEALs. Sarah had been working at the base for 3 months now. She kept to herself mostly, doing her job with quiet efficiency. The other medical staff respected her skills but knew very little about her past. She preferred it that way. When asked about her background, she would simply say she had some military experience and change the subject. Her colleagues assumed she had been a regular Army medic or maybe worked in a field hospital somewhere, safe. The truth was far more complicated. That morning brought news that made Sarah's stomach tighten with worry. A SEAL team had been injured during a training exercise gone wrong. Multiple casualties were incoming, and all available medical personnel were called to the emergency bay. Sarah grabbed her supplies and headed toward the chaos that was about to unfold. The first helicopter landed with a thunderous roar, its rotors whipping dust and debris across the landing pad. Sarah ran alongside the stretcher as the first wounded SEAL was rushed inside. His leg was badly injured, blood seeping through hastily applied bandages. His teammates followed closely, their faces grim with concern for their brother. "What happened out there?" Sarah asked one of the SEALs as she began working on the wounded man. "IED simulation went wrong," the SEAL replied, his voice tight with worry. "Marcus here took the worst of it, but we've got 2 more coming in." Sarah nodded and focused on her patient. Her hands moved with practiced precision, cleaning wounds and checking for internal injuries. The injured SEAL, Marcus, was conscious but in significant pain. She spoke to him in a calm, reassuring voice while she worked. "You're going to be fine," she told him. "I've seen much worse than this, and those soldiers walked away just fine." Marcus looked up at her through pain-clouded eyes. "You talk like you've been in combat yourself, Doc." Sarah paused for just a moment, her hand stilling over his wounds. "Focus on staying still for me," she said quietly, avoiding his question. The second helicopter arrived minutes later, bringing 2 more injured SEALs. One had a concussion and possible internal injuries, while the other had severe cuts from shrapnel. The medical bay erupted into controlled chaos as doctors and nurses worked to stabilize the patients. Sarah found herself assigned to the SEAL with the concussion. He was drifting in and out of consciousness, mumbling words that didn't make sense. As she checked his pupils for signs of brain injury, he suddenly grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "The bridge," he whispered urgently. "We have to secure the bridge." Sarah recognized the signs immediately. He was reliving a combat memory, probably triggered by the head injury. She had seen it countless times before. She gently but firmly removed his hand from her wrist. "The bridge is secure," she told him in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Mission accomplished." "Stand down, soldier." The SEAL's eyes focused on her face for a moment, confusion replacing the panic. Something in her tone and the way she carried herself made him relax. He nodded slightly and closed his eyes, finally allowing the medical team to work on him properly. Dr. Williams, the head of the medical team, noticed the interaction. He had been watching Sarah work with growing admiration. Her skills were exceptional, far beyond what he would expect from a typical base medic. The way she handled trauma cases suggested extensive field experience. "Nice work with Peterson there," Dr. Williams said to Sarah as they moved between patients. "You handled his combat stress reaction perfectly. Where did you learn techniques like that?" Sarah kept her eyes on her work. "You pick things up over time," she replied vaguely. The third patient required the most attention. His injuries were severe enough that he needed immediate surgery. As the surgical team prepared to take him to the operating room, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The injured SEAL had a tattoo on his shoulder, a unit insignia she recognized all too well. It was the same unit she had served with during her darkest days in Afghanistan. The same unit where she had earned her reputation as one of the most skilled combat medics in the Special Forces. The same unit where she had saved lives under impossible conditions and lost friends she would never forget. Sarah forced herself to stay focused on the present, but memories threatened to overwhelm her. She remembered the heat and dust of Afghanistan, the sound of gunfire, the weight of responsibility for keeping her teammates alive. She remembered the day everything changed, the day that ended her military career and sent her seeking the quiet anonymity of base medical work. As the hours passed, Sarah worked tirelessly alongside the medical team. Her skills shone through in every procedure, every decision she made. The other medical staff began to take notice of her exceptional abilities. She seemed to anticipate complications before they happened, knew exactly which medications to use, and handled even the most difficult situations with calm confidence. The injured SEALs were stabilized and moved to recovery rooms. Sarah finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She stepped outside the medical facility, needing fresh air and space to think. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her too much of distant explosions. She didn't notice that. Several of the uninjured SEALs from the training exercise had been watching her work throughout the day. They had seen how she handled their wounded teammates, how she seemed to understand combat trauma in a way that went beyond textbook knowledge. They were beginning to suspect that their quiet base medic had secrets worth knowing. As Sarah stood alone in the gathering darkness, she made a decision that would soon change everything. She had spent 3 months hiding from her past, but today had shown her that some things couldn't stay buried forever. The skills that had made her legendary among special forces were still there, just waiting beneath the surface. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Sarah had a feeling that her carefully constructed quiet life was about to become much more complicated. The next morning arrived with an unexpected visitor. Commander Jake Thompson, leader of the SEAL team that had been injured, stood at the entrance to the medical facility. He was a tall, imposing man with steel gray eyes that missed nothing. Unlike his injured teammates, he had escaped the training accident with only minor cuts and bruises. Now he was here for answers. Sarah was checking on Marcus, the SEAL with the leg injury, when she noticed Commander Thompson watching her from the doorway. There was something in his gaze that made her uncomfortable, as if he was trying to piece together a puzzle with her as the missing piece. "How are you feeling today?" Sarah asked Marcus, checking his bandages and monitoring his pain levels. "Much better, thanks to you," Marcus replied. "Doc, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about seeing worse injuries. Where exactly did you serve?" Before Sarah could answer, Commander Thompson stepped into the room. "That's what I'd like to know too," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to getting answers. Sarah looked up from Marcus's chart, her expression carefully neutral. "Is there something I can help you with, Commander?" "Actually, yes," Thompson replied. "I wanted to thank you personally for the excellent care you gave my men yesterday. Dr. Williams tells me you showed exceptional skill in handling combat trauma cases." "I was just doing my job," Sarah said quietly, continuing to focus on her patient. Thompson moved closer, studying her face. "See, that's what's interesting. The way you handled Peterson's combat stress reaction, the medications you chose, the procedures you used. They're not standard base medical training. They're techniques used by special operations medics." Sarah's hand stilled for a moment before she resumed her work. "I've had additional training," she said simply. "What kind of additional training?" Thompson pressed. Marcus looked between them, sensing the tension in the room. Even in his injured state, he could tell that something significant was happening. The other SEALs who had come to visit their teammate also seemed to pick up on the undercurrent of the conversation. "Commander, with respect, I have other patients to check on," Sarah said, moving toward the door, but Thompson stepped into her path. "I ran a background check on you, Martinez." "Interesting reading," Sarah froze. Her carefully constructed cover was apparently not as solid as she had hoped. She turned to face him fully, her jaw set in a hard line. "Oh," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "According to your file, you served as a regular Army medic for 4 years before being discharged for medical reasons. No deployments listed. No special operations experience. No combat decorations." Thompson paused, watching her reaction. "Funny thing is, I've never seen a regular Army medic work the way you did yesterday." The room had gone completely silent. Marcus and the visiting SEALs were watching the exchange with growing interest. They could sense that their quiet base medic was not what she appeared to be. Sarah met Thompson's gaze steadily. "People can learn a lot from textbooks and training videos," she said. Thompson smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "Is that so? Then maybe you can explain how you knew to use a specific medication that's only taught in special operations medical courses, or how you recognized Peterson's combat stress symptoms so quickly." or why you carry yourself like someone who's been under fire. I think you're reading too much into things, Commander, Sarah replied, but her voice had lost some of its steadiness. Am I? Thompson pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. Because I made some calls yesterday after watching you work. Called some old friends in Special Operations medical units. Described your techniques, your bearing, the way you handled crisis situations. Sarah's face had gone pale, but she remained silent. Want to know what they told me? Thompson continued. They said there was only one medic they knew who worked exactly the way I described. Problem is, that medic is supposed to be dead. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus struggled to sit up straighter in his bed, ignoring the pain in his leg. The other SEALs exchanged glances, suddenly understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Dead? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Thompson nodded, never taking his eyes off Sarah. Killed in action 3 years ago in Afghanistan. Died saving her entire unit during an ambush. Posthumously awarded the Silver Star. Her name was Sarah Martinez. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stood perfectly still, her face a mask of control that was rapidly cracking. The weight of 3 years of hiding, of pretending to be someone she wasn't, suddenly felt unbearable. You're wrong, she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Thompson stepped closer. Because the woman I'm looking at right now has the same build, the same hair color, and the exact same medical skills as the legendary ghost medic of Afghanistan. The medic who saved over 200 special operations soldiers during her deployment, the medic who could perform surgery under fire and never lost a patient. The ghost medic is dead, Sarah said firmly. She died in that ambush, did she? Thompson asked softly. Or did she just decide to disappear? The question hung between them like a challenge. Sarah looked around the room at the faces watching her. Marcus, despite his injuries, was leaning forward with intense interest. The other SEALs had moved closer, forming an unconscious circle around her. These were men who understood sacrifice, who knew what it meant to lose everything in service to their country. Why would someone fake their own death? Marcus asked quietly. Thompson answered without breaking eye contact with Sarah. Maybe because they couldn't live with the guilt of surviving when their team didn't. Maybe because they blamed themselves for not being able to save everyone. Maybe because the war followed them home and they needed to disappear to find peace. Sarah's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time since Thompson had entered the room, she looked truly vulnerable. You don't know what you're talking about, she whispered. Don't I? Thompson's voice was gentler now. I know about the ambush, Martinez. I know how your unit was surrounded, how you stayed behind to treat the wounded while under heavy fire. I know how you saved 17 men that day before the rescue team arrived. I also know about the 3 men you couldn't save. Tears appeared in Sarah's eyes, though she fought to keep them from falling. I could have saved them, she said, her voice breaking. If I had been faster, if I had made different choices. You did everything humanly possible, Thompson said firmly. Everyone knows that. The men you saved know that. Their families know that. The question is, when are you going to know that? The room remained silent as Sarah struggled with emotions she had buried for 3 years. The ghost medic, the legend that special operations soldiers told stories about, was standing right in front of them, broken and trying to heal in the only way she knew how. The tears Sarah had been fighting finally began to fall. She quickly wiped them away, but the damage was done. Her carefully constructed walls were crumbling, and 3 years of suppressed grief and guilt came flooding back. The SEALs in the room watched in stunned silence as their quiet base medic transformed before their eyes into someone entirely different. The ghost medic, Marcus whispered in amazement. I heard stories about you in Afghanistan. Every special ops unit talked about the medic who could work miracles under fire. Sarah shook her head violently. Those stories are exaggerated. I'm not some legend. I'm just someone who failed when it mattered most. Commander Thompson stepped closer, his expression softening. Tell us what really happened that day, Sarah. Not the official report. The truth. Sarah looked around the room at the faces surrounding her. These were warriors who understood loss, men who had faced death and made impossible choices. For the first time in 3 years, she was among people who might actually understand. We were supposed to be extracting a high-value target, she began, her voice barely audible. Intelligence said the area was clear. It wasn't. The room remained completely silent as Sarah began to relive the worst day of her life. The ambush came from 3 sides. We were trapped in a compound with nowhere to go. The team leader, Sergeant Rodriguez, took a round to the chest in the first few seconds. Then Morrison got hit in the leg and Jackson took shrapnel from a grenade. Sarah's hands began to tremble as the memories poured out. I was trying to treat 3 men at once while bullets were flying overhead. Rodriguez was bleeding out fast. I managed to stabilize him, got Jackson's bleeding under control. Morrison's leg was bad, but he'd live. Sounds like you saved them, one of the SEALs said quietly. I thought I had. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with pain. But then they brought in more wounded. Henderson had taken a round to the abdomen. Davis had a head injury. Then Thompson, not you, Commander, different Thompson. He got hit trying to reach the radio. Thompson noticed how her medical training took over even in her memories, how she automatically cataloged injuries and treatments even in the midst of telling her story. The extraction team was 20 minutes out. I just had to keep everyone alive for 20 minutes. I had enough supplies, enough training. 20 minutes should have been easy. Sarah's voice broke again, but Rodriguez's wound was worse than I thought. Internal bleeding I couldn't stop in the field. And Davis's head injury. There were complications I didn't see coming. Thompson's wound got infected so fast. Battlefield medicine isn't perfect, Marcus said gently. You can't predict every complication. I should have. Sarah shouted, her composure finally shattering completely. I was supposed to be the best. Everyone said I was the best combat medic they'd ever seen. But when it mattered most, when my own team needed me, I couldn't save them. The raw pain in her voice made every person in the room wince. These were men who understood survivors' guilt, who had lost teammates and blamed themselves for not doing more. Commander Thompson moved closer to Sarah, his voice gentle but firm. How many men did you treat that day in total? 20, Sarah whispered. And how many lived? 17. 17 men went home to their families because of you, Thompson said. 17 mothers got their sons back. 17 wives got their husbands back. 17 sets of children got to grow up with their fathers. But 3 didn't, Sarah shot back. 3 men died because I wasn't good enough. 3 men died because war is hell and sometimes people die no matter what we do, Marcus said from his bed. Doc, I've been in enough firefights to know that losing 3 out of 20 in an ambush situation like that, most medics would have lost half the unit or more. Sarah shook her head. You don't understand. After the extraction, after the funerals, I couldn't function anymore. Every time I tried to treat a patient, I saw Rodriguez bleeding out. Every head injury reminded me of Davis. Every infection made me think of Thompson. So you disappeared, Commander Thompson said. I faked my death and created a new identity, Sarah admitted. I thought if I could start over, work in a safe environment where life and death wasn't constantly on the line, maybe I could find some peace. And did you? Marcus asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. For a while. Working here, treating routine injuries and illnesses. It was the calm, peaceful. No one was depending on me to perform miracles. But yesterday changed that, Thompson observed. Yesterday, when your men came in wounded, all that training kicked in automatically. I wasn't thinking about Rodriguez or Davis or Thompson. I was just focused on saving the patients in front of me. And you did save them, Marcus pointed out. All of us. We're all going to be fine because of your skills. It was different, Sarah said, struggling to explain. Yesterday, for the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. Like the medic I used to be before everything fell apart. The SEALs in the room exchanged glances. They were beginning to understand why their quiet base medic had seemed so extraordinarily skilled. They were also beginning to see that she was at a crossroads. Sarah, Commander Thompson said carefully, what if I told you that your skills are needed? That there are missions, situations where having someone with your abilities could save lives? Sarah looked up sharply. I'm not going back to combat medicine. I can't. I'm not talking about combat, Thompson clarified. I'm talking about training. Teaching other medics the techniques, you know. Sharing the knowledge that could help them save more lives in the field. I don't know, Sarah said uncertainly. Think about it, Marcus added from his bed. If you hadn't been here yesterday, if some regular base medic had been treating us instead, how different might things have been? Sarah considered this. It was true that her special operations training had made a significant difference in how Quickly and effectively, she had treated their injuries. "Ghost medic doesn't have to stay dead," Thompson said quietly. "She could come back in a different way. Not as a field medic, but as someone who makes sure other medics have the skills to be heroes too." For the first time since the conversation began, Sarah looked genuinely thoughtful rather than defensive or pained. The idea of using her knowledge to train others, to help save lives without being directly responsible for battlefield decisions, was appealing. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Take all the time you need," Thompson replied. "But know this, the military needs people like you, not just for your medical skills, but for your experience, your knowledge, your ability to stay calm under pressure." As Sarah left the room, the SEALs watched her go with new understanding and respect. They had witnessed something remarkable, the resurrection of a legend who had been hiding in plain sight, someone who had sacrificed everything for others, and was slowly learning to live with the consequences of both her successes and her failures. Word spread quickly through the base, but not in the way Sarah had feared. Commander Thompson had spoken privately with his men, emphasizing the need for discretion and respect. The SEALs understood the importance of protecting someone who had given so much for others. Still, Sarah could feel the change in how people looked at her as she moved through the medical facility. Dr. Williams approached her that afternoon while she was updating patient charts. His expression was thoughtful, almost reverent. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said quietly, gesturing toward his office. She followed him reluctantly, knowing that her secret was spreading beyond the SEAL team. Inside his office, Dr. Williams closed the door and turned to face her. "Commander Thompson told me who you really are," he said simply. "The ghost medic. I have to say everything makes sense now. The way you work, your instincts, your techniques. I knew there was something extraordinary about your background." Sarah remained silent, waiting for what would come next. "I want you to know that your secret is safe with me," Dr. Williams continued. "But I also want you to consider something. We have young medics here who could benefit tremendously from your knowledge, not just the technical skills, but the decision-making under pressure, the ability to stay calm when everything is falling apart. Dr. Williams, I appreciate what you're saying, but just hear me out," he interrupted gently. "What if we created an advanced trauma training program, something that could be taught to military medics before they deploy? You could design the curriculum, share the techniques that saved so many lives." Sarah shook her head. "I don't think I'm ready for that kind of responsibility again." "Think about the medics who are deploying right now without the benefit of your experience," Dr. Williams pressed. "Think about the soldiers who might not come home because their medic didn't know a technique you could have taught them." His words hit harder than Sarah expected. She had been so focused on her own guilt and pain that she hadn't considered how her knowledge could prevent others from experiencing the same losses. "I need some air," she said. Heading for the door, outside the medical facility, Sarah found herself walking toward the beach at the edge of the base. The sound of waves crashing against the shore had always calmed her, but today her mind was too turbulent for peace. She sat on a piece of driftwood and stared out at the ocean, trying to process everything that had happened. "Mind if I join you?" Sarah looked up to see Marcus approaching, leaning heavily on crutches. His leg was still heavily bandaged, but he was mobile. "You should be resting," she said automatically, her medical instincts kicking in. "I've been resting all day," Marcus replied, carefully lowering himself onto the sand beside her log. "Besides, I wanted to thank you properly." "You already thanked me." "Not for fixing my leg," Marcus clarified. "For yesterday. For showing us what real dedication looks like. For reminding us why we do what we do." Sarah looked at him with confusion. "I don't understand." Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Do you know what we call ourselves? SEALs, I mean. We say we're the best of the best, the elite, the ones who never give up. But yesterday, watching you work, seeing how you blamed yourself for things that weren't your fault, it made us realize something." "What's that?" "That real heroism isn't about being perfect. It's about doing everything you possibly can, even when you know it might not be enough. You didn't fail in Afghanistan, Doc. You succeeded in the most impossible circumstances imaginable." Sarah felt tears threatening again. 3 men died, and 17 lived, Marcus said firmly. "Do you think Rodriguez would want you to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for his death? Do you think Davis would want his sacrifice to drive you into hiding?" "I don't know," Sarah whispered. "I do. Marcus said with conviction. Because I know what I'd want if I died in combat. I'd want my medic to keep saving lives. I'd want them to use what they learned from my case to save others. I wouldn't want them to give up and hide. They sat in silence for a while, watching the waves roll in and out. Finally, Marcus spoke again. Commander Thompson got a call today. There's a training exercise next month where several units will be practicing casualty evacuation and field medicine. They asked if we had anyone who could observe and provide feedback on their techniques. Sarah turned to look at him. And Thompson recommended you. Not as the ghost medic, but as Sarah Martinez, advanced trauma specialist. You wouldn't have to reveal your full background. Just observe, maybe offer some suggestions. I don't know if I can do that. Just think about it, Marcus said, struggling to his feet with the crutches. Think about how many people you could help without ever having to make life or death decisions again. As Marcus walked away, Sarah remained on the beach as the sun began to set. She thought about the conversation with Dr. Williams, about creating a training program. She thought about young medics deploying without the knowledge she had gained through years of experience and terrible losses. For the first time since Afghanistan, Sarah allowed herself to imagine a different future, not one where she hid from her past, but one where she used it to help others. The idea was terrifying and appealing at the same time. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Commander Thompson. Spoke with some people in training command. They're very interested in consulting with someone who has your experience. No pressure, but the door is open when you're ready. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. 3 years ago, she had made the decision to disappear, to leave behind everything she had been. Now she was being offered the chance to become something new. Not the ghost medic who carried the weight of every loss, but someone who could prevent others from experiencing those same losses. She thought about Rodriguez, Davis, and Thompson, the 3 men whose deaths had haunted her. What would they want her to do? Would they want her to stay hidden, consumed by guilt over their deaths? Or would they want her to use what she had learned to save others? The answer when it came to her was surprisingly clear. They would want her to keep fighting, just in a different way. Sarah stood up from the driftwood and walked back toward the base. She had a decision to make, and for the first time in 3 years she felt ready to make it. The ghost medic might have died in Afghanistan, but Sarah Martinez was still very much alive. And she had work to do. As she reached the medical facility, she could see lights still on in Dr. Williams' office. She took a deep breath and headed toward his door. It was time to stop running from her past and start building a future where her knowledge could save lives without destroying her own. Sarah knocked softly on Dr. Williams' office door. Through the glass, she could see him hunched over paperwork, his desk lamp casting a warm glow in the darkening evening. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, quickly gesturing for her to come in. "I was hoping you'd come back," he said, setting down his pen. "Have you given any thought to what we discussed?" Sarah took a seat across from his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I want to help," she said quietly, "but I need to do this my way, at my own pace." Dr. Williams leaned forward, his expression encouraging. "Whatever you need. Tell me what you're thinking." "Start small," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Maybe work with a few junior medics here on base first. Teach them some advanced techniques, see how it goes. If that works out," she paused, taking a breath. "If that works out, maybe we could expand to formal training programs." "That sounds perfect," Dr. Williams replied enthusiastically. "I have 3 young medics who just completed their basic training. They're eager to learn, and honestly, they could use the guidance of someone with your experience." Sarah nodded slowly. "What would you tell them about my background?" "Only what you're comfortable sharing. We could say you have extensive trauma experience and specialized training." "That's not a lie." "No," Sarah agreed. "It's not." Dr. Williams pulled out a folder from his desk drawer. "I took the liberty of pulling their files just in case you were interested." "Would you like to meet them?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Tomorrow. I'd like to meet them tomorrow." As she left Dr. Williams' office, Sarah felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation she hadn't experienced in years. She was scared, but it was a different kind of fear than the paralyzing terror that had driven her into hiding. This was the fear of someone about to take a leap of faith. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the medical facility early. She had spent most of the night thinking about what she wanted to teach, how she could share her knowledge without overwhelming the young medics with the weight of her experiences. Dr. Williams introduced her to the 3 junior medics in a small conference room. There was Jenny Park, a 22-year-old who had joined the Navy straight out of college, Michael Torres, a former EMT who had decided to serve his country, and David Kim, who had grown up in a military family and always wanted to be a medic. Medic Martinez has agreed to provide some advanced training for you 3, Dr. Williams explained. She has extensive experience in trauma medicine and field operations. The 3 young medics looked at Sarah with curiosity and respect. They had all heard about her exceptional work with the injured SEALs, though they didn't know the full story of who she really was. "What would you like to learn?" Sarah asked, surprising them with the directness of her question. Jenny raised her hand tentatively. How do you stay calm when everything is going wrong? When I was working on the SEAL with the concussion the other day, I felt completely overwhelmed. Sarah nodded, remembering her own early days as a medic. The first thing to understand is that feeling overwhelmed is normal. The key is learning to function despite that feeling, not getting rid of it entirely. She moved to the whiteboard at the front of the room and began drawing a simple diagram. In trauma situations, you need to triage not just your patients, but your own thoughts and actions. What needs to happen immediately? What can wait? What resources do you have available? For the next hour, Sarah walked them through decision-making processes for trauma situations. She found herself drawing on memories and experiences she had buried for 3 years. But instead of causing pain, sharing this knowledge felt healing. Michael raised his hand. How do you handle it when you can't save someone? When you've done everything right, but the patient still doesn't make it? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stood frozen at the whiteboard, marker in hand, as the faces of Rodriguez, Davis, and Thompson flashed through her mind. The room fell silent as the young medics realized they had touched on something deeply personal. Sarah turned to face them, and for a moment they could see the weight of experience and loss in her eyes. That's the hardest part of this job," Sarah said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "You're going to lose patience. No matter how skilled you are, no matter how hard you try, sometimes people die." She set down the marker and sat on the edge of the desk, making herself more accessible to them. "The important thing to remember is that your job isn't to be God. Your job is to give each patient the best possible chance. Sometimes that's enough and sometimes it isn't. But you can't blame yourself for the limitations of medicine or the realities of trauma." David spoke up quietly. "How do you live with it, though?" "The guilt?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I'm still learning how to do that. I lost 3 patients in Afghanistan, and I blamed myself for their deaths for 3 years. I convinced myself that I had failed them." The young medics looked at her with new understanding. They could see that their instructor wasn't just teaching them techniques. She was sharing hard-won wisdom about the emotional toll of their chosen profession. "But recently," Sarah continued, "some very wise people helped me realize that punishing myself for those deaths doesn't honor their memory. Using what I learned from those cases to save others, that honors their memory." Jenny leaned forward. "Is that why you're teaching us?" "Partly," Sarah admitted, "but also because I believe that sharing knowledge is how we get better as medics, as healers. Every technique I teach you, every decision-making process we practice could help you save someone's life someday." The training session continued for another hour, but the dynamic had changed. The young medics were no longer just learning medical procedures. They were learning from someone who understood the full weight and responsibility of being a combat medic. After the session ended, Sarah felt emotionally drained but oddly energized. Teaching had reminded her why she had become a medic in the first place, not for glory or recognition, but to help people, to make a difference when it mattered most. Dr. Williams approached her as the young medics filed out of the room. "How did that feel?" "Different than I expected," Sarah replied honestly. "Good, but difficult. Talking about Afghanistan, about losing patients. I haven't done that before. Do you think you'll want to continue?" Sarah looked out the window at the 3 young medics walking across the courtyard, discussing what they had learned. "Yes," she said with growing conviction. "I think I will." That afternoon, Commander Thompson stopped by the medical facility. He found Sarah in the equipment room taking inventory of supplies. "Heard you started teaching today," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Word travels fast around here," Sarah replied without looking up from her clipboard. How did it go? Sarah paused in her counting and turned to face him. It was harder than I thought it would be, but also healing in a way. Talking about my experiences, sharing what I've learned. It felt like those losses might actually mean something. Thompson nodded approvingly. That's good to hear. I have something else to ask you about if you're interested. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What now? There's a joint training exercise next month. Multiple branches, international participants. They're looking for medical consultants to observe and provide feedback. It would be a chance to see how different units handle trauma care, maybe share some insights with a broader audience. The offer was both exciting and terrifying. It would mean stepping further out of the shadows, taking on more responsibility, potentially having her expertise recognized on a larger scale. I'll think about it, Sarah said finally. That's all I ask, Thompson replied. But Sarah, don't think too long. The world needs what you have to offer. As Thompson left, Sarah realized that she was standing at another crossroads. She could stay safe, teaching a few young medics on base, keeping her profile low. Or she could take the next step toward becoming the person she was meant to be. Not the ghost medic, but someone new. Someone who could honor her past while building a different kind of future. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself standing on the observation deck of a massive training facility, watching dozens of military medics from different branches and allied nations practice casualty evacuation procedures. The joint exercise was larger than anything she had imagined, with helicopters landing and taking off constantly, mock wounded soldiers being treated in field hospitals, and instructors critiquing every move. She had agreed to participate as an observer and consultant, though her stomach churned with nervousness as she watched the organized chaos below. Dr. Williams had introduced her simply as Specialist Martinez, Advanced Trauma Consultant, and so far, no one had questioned her credentials. Impressive setup, isn't it? Sarah turned to see a British Army colonel approaching. He was tall and distinguished, with the bearing of someone who had seen significant combat. Yes, sir, Sarah replied. Very comprehensive. Colonel James Mitchell, he introduced himself, extending his hand. I understand you're here to observe our medical procedures. That's right. I have some experience in combat trauma care that might be useful. Colonel Mitchell nodded approvingly, always happy to learn from someone with field experience. Mind if I ask where you served? Sarah had prepared for this question, but it still made her uncomfortable. Afghanistan, mostly. Special Operations Support. Excellent. We could use someone with that perspective. Actually, we're having some difficulties with one of the scenarios. Would you mind taking a look? Before Sarah could object, Colonel Mitchell was leading her down to the training floor. They approached a mock battlefield where medics were attempting to treat multiple casualties under simulated fire. Sarah could immediately see several problems with their approach. The issue, Colonel Mitchell explained, is that we're losing too many patients in this scenario. The medics are following protocol, but something isn't working. Sarah watched for a few more minutes, her trained eye cataloging the mistakes and inefficiencies. The medics were competent, but they lacked the instinctive decision-making that came from real combat experience. May I? She asked, gesturing toward the scenario. Please, Colonel Mitchell replied. Sarah walked onto the training field, immediately feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with a medical emergency, even a simulated one. She approached the lead medic, a young Marine who was struggling to prioritize multiple severe casualties. What's your assessment? She asked quietly. The Marine looked up, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool weather. 3 critical, 2 serious, 1 minor. I'm trying to stabilize the criticals first, but I'm losing them. Sarah nodded, quickly surveying the mock casualties. Show me your treatment plan for the chest wound. As the Marine explained his approach, Sarah could see exactly where the problems lay. His technique was textbook correct, but textbooks didn't account for the realities of combat medicine. Good foundation, she told him, but try this modification. She demonstrated a technique for rapid chest decompression that was faster and more effective under fire conditions. The Marine's eyes widened as he watched her work. I've never seen that approach before. It's not in the standard manual, Sarah explained, but it works when time is critical and conditions are less than ideal. Word spread quickly through the training area that the consultant was providing hands-on instruction. Other medics began gathering around to watch and learn. Sarah found herself teaching techniques she had developed in Afghanistan. sharing knowledge that had been locked away for 3 years. "Where did you learn that?" asked a Navy medic after Sarah demonstrated an advanced airway management technique. "Experience," Sarah replied simply. "Lots of trial and error in situations where error wasn't really an option." Colonel Mitchell watched from the sideline with growing amazement. This quiet consultant was transforming the entire training exercise, teaching techniques that were clearly years ahead of standard protocols. "Specialist Martinez," he called out during a break. "Might I have a word?" Sarah joined him away from the other participants. She could see the curiosity and respect in his expression. "I've been doing this for 25 years, Colonel Mitchell said quietly. "I've never seen someone teach combat medicine the way you do. Your techniques, your understanding of battlefield conditions, it's extraordinary." Sarah felt the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. "I've had good teachers, undoubtedly. But there's something else. The way you move, the way you assess situations, the confidence in your voice when you're teaching, you remind me of someone I knew in Afghanistan." Sarah's breath caught. "Oh?" "There was a medic there, American, who worked with special operations. Never met her personally, but everyone talked about her techniques, her success rate. They called her the ghost medic. Legendary figure, really. Died in an ambush a few years back." "I've heard the stories," Sarah managed to say. Colonel Mitchell studied her face carefully. "Have you? Because watching you work today, I can't help but think that if she had lived, she would have taught exactly the way you do." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted from the training area. One of the participants, a young Army medic, had collapsed during the exercise. This wasn't part of the simulation. He was genuinely in distress. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She ran to the fallen medic, quickly assessing his condition while others stood around in confusion. He was conscious but having difficulty breathing, his lips showing signs of cyanosis. "Allergic reaction," Sarah diagnosed quickly. "Severe anaphylaxis." "Where's the epinephrine?" "In the medical kit," someone called out, but they were precious seconds away from retrieving it. Sarah made a split-second decision. She pulled out her own emergency medical supplies, equipment she always carried but had hoped never to use again, and administered treatment with the same calm efficiency that had made her legendary in Afghanistan. The young medic's breathing stabilized within minutes. As the base medical team arrived to transport him to the hospital, Sarah stepped back, suddenly aware that dozens of people had watched her work. The training area was completely silent. Every medic, every instructor, every observer had seen her move with the kind of instinctive skill that couldn't be taught in classrooms. They had witnessed something extraordinary. Colonel Mitchell approached her slowly, his expression one of awe and understanding. "That was remarkable," he said quietly. "In all my years, I've only seen a few people work with that level of skill under pressure." Sarah looked around at the faces staring at her. She realized that there was no going back now. Her secret was essentially out, not because someone had discovered her identity, but because her skills had revealed themselves. "The ghost medic," Colonel Mitchell said so quietly that only she could hear. "She's not dead, is she?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. For 3 years she had lived in fear of this moment. But standing here, having just saved a life, having spent the day teaching others to save lives, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Afghanistan. Purpose. "No," she said simply. "She's not dead." The training exercise had ended, but Sarah's real journey was just beginning. She had spent 3 years hiding from her legend. But now she was ready to become something new. Not the ghost medic, but Sarah Martinez, teacher, healer, and someone who understood that the best way to honor the dead was to help the living. As the participants began filing out of the training area, many stopped to thank her for what they had learned. Sarah realized that this was what Rodriguez, Davis, and Thompson would have wanted. Not for her to disappear in guilt, but to use their sacrifice to make other medics better, to save other lives. The ghost medic was dead, but Sarah Martinez was very much alive and she had work to do. 6 months after the joint training exercise, Sarah stood in front of a classroom filled with military medics from around the world. The Advanced Combat Medical Training Center had been established based on her recommendations, and she had been appointed as the chief instructor. The walls were covered with charts, anatomical diagrams, and photos of successful field operations where her techniques had saved lives. "The most important thing to remember," Sarah told her students, "is that every decision you make in the field has consequences. Not just for your patient, but for their families, their units, and for you as a medical professional. The students listened intently, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. They came from different countries, different branches of service, but they all shared the same goal: to be the best combat medics they could be. Sarah had found her calling in teaching. Each class brought new challenges, new perspectives, and new opportunities to share the hard-won knowledge that had cost her so much to acquire. The nightmares about Afghanistan still came sometimes, but they were balanced now by dreams of the lives she was helping to save through her students. After class, Sarah walked to her office, which overlooked the training grounds where medics practiced the techniques she had developed. On her desk was a letter that had arrived that morning, one of many she received from former students now deployed around the world. "Dear Instructor Martinez," it read, "I wanted you to know that the airway management technique you taught us saved 3 lives during our recent deployment. The combat engineers who are alive today because of your training wanted me to thank you personally. You taught me that being a medic isn't just about following protocols. It's about adapting, thinking quickly, and never giving up on a patient. Thank you for showing us what real excellence looks like." Sarah smiled as she read the letter. Messages like this arrived regularly now, each one a reminder that her decision to return to teaching had been the right one. Every life saved by one of her students was a victory not just for them, but for the memory of Rodriguez, Davis, and Thompson. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Commander Thompson, now a regular visitor to the training center. "How did today's class go?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Well," Sarah replied, "we covered advanced surgical procedures under fire. I think they're starting to understand that textbook medicine and combat medicine are 2 very different things." Thompson nodded approvingly. "I have some news you might be interested in. The Department of Defense is recommending your training program for expansion to all branches of the military. They want to make your advanced techniques part of standard combat medic certification." Sarah leaned back in her chair, amazed at how far she had come. "That's incredible. It gets better," Thompson continued. "They're also discussing the creation of a new position, Director of Advanced Medical Training. The job would involve overseeing combat medical education across all services. Are you offering me the position? I'm telling you that if you want it, it's yours. Your work here has revolutionized how we train combat medics. The success rate in the field has improved dramatically since your techniques became widespread." Sarah considered the offer. It would mean leaving the classroom she had grown to love, but it would also mean having an even greater impact on military medical training. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. But Sarah, I want you to know something. When I first discovered who you really were, I thought I was uncovering a tragedy, someone who had been broken by war and was hiding from their past. But I was wrong." Thompson leaned forward, his expression serious. "What I actually discovered was someone who had the strength to transform their pain into purpose. The ghost medic saved lives in Afghanistan, but Sarah Martinez is saving lives all over the world." After Thompson left, Sarah walked out to the training grounds. The afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the field where medics were practicing casualty evacuation procedures. She watched a young Air Force medic successfully perform a technique she had taught him just weeks earlier. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus, who had recovered fully from his injuries and was back on active duty. "Heard about the promotion opportunity? Whatever you decide, know that you've already changed everything. The SEAL community still talks about you, not as the ghost medic, but as the instructor who taught us that healing is just as important as fighting." Sarah smiled at the message. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the battlefields of Afghanistan to this training center where she was preparing the next generation of combat medics. The path had been difficult, marked by loss and pain and years of hiding, but it had led her to a place where she could make a real difference. As the last of the trainees finished their exercises and headed back to their barracks, Sarah remained on the field. She thought about Rodriguez, Davis, and Thompson, the 3 soldiers whose deaths had haunted her for so long. She had finally learned to honor their memory not by carrying guilt, but by ensuring that other medics would be better prepared than she had been. The ghost medic had indeed died in Afghanistan, but from her death had emerged something new and powerful: a teacher, a leader, and a healer who understood that the greatest victory wasn't saving every patient, but preparing others to save the patients you couldn't reach. Sarah pulled out her phone and typed a message to Commander Thompson. I'll take the position. When do I start? The response came quickly. Congratulations, Director Martinez. Welcome to your new mission. As Sarah walked back toward the training center, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. She had found her way home, not to a place but to a purpose. The wounded medic who had arrived at the base a year ago, quiet and hiding from her past, had become someone who could face the future with confidence and hope. The SEALs had gone still when they learned about her combat past, but not out of pity or fear. They had recognized what she was, a warrior who had learned that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with knowledge, compassion, and the determination to turn pain into purpose. Sarah Martinez, former Ghost Medic, current Director of Advanced Medical Training, smiled as she planned the curriculum that would prepare the next generation of military medics. Her war was far from over, but now she was fighting it in the way she was meant to, by healing, teaching, and ensuring that no medic would ever have to face the impossible choices she had faced without the best possible preparation. The quiet medic was quiet no more. She had found her voice and the world was listening.